Hi, good to see you, even if it's only virtual. I'm Dr. Roelof, Botha, Economic Advisor to the Optimum Investment Group, and I'd like to share with you the good news. And the good news is that we have a V-shaped economic recovery. A hell of a lot of sectors of this economy are coming back on stream, and they are more or less where they were a couple of months ago. One of my favorite adages is, don't get bogged down in April. April was a disaster. It was a disaster in virtually every country in the world, including South Africa, but we are moving away from April at a rapid rate of knots. I'm going to start with a little bit of bad news, in the sense that we are all aware of what happened to the capital markets. Our long-term bond yield almost went through the roof. Now, remember, when the bond yield increases, then the value of the bond declines. So if you were to calculate the reciprocal of this slide, the value of South Africa's long-term bonds, then you will see a very clear V. And if you get bored during this brief presentation, you can do yourself a favor and count the number of V's that I'm going to show you. So this would be number one. We've had a 300 basis point decline in the bond yield, and what that in essence means is that the rest of the world, they're buying our bonds again, which is good news. The same thing happened to the rand. Now, you'll tell me that if I tell you there's a V here, you may differ from me and ask me what I had in my coffee, but if you were to calculate the reciprocal, remember, this is the value of a dollar, not of a rand. If you were to calculate the value of a rand, and you pick just before the coronavirus up to where it really hit us badly and where we are today, then you see another pronounced V. So that would be number two. I'll give you some tips as we go along. And in fact, this one doesn't count because it's also the exchange rate, but it's the real effective exchange rate. And you can clearly see the economic recovery. When the blue line increases, it means the rand is strengthening. And it was on its way to overvalued territory, which is above the red line, when the trade war and the coronavirus hit us. But look what's happened since. A little bit of volatility, but it's on its way to that line. And if you do hear these suggestions by some fund managers that you should take all your money overseas, please don't listen to them. The rand is undervalued to the tune of about 17%. It's really not a good idea. One of these guys recently said you must sell your car and take the money overseas. Now, I have a problem with that. How the hell are you going to get to work? So things are not as bad as some of these cynics make them out to be. This is the really bad news, and that is that our public debt GDP ratio, this is pre-COVID, just below 60. That's moving up now to in the vicinity of 80. Important point. You can add 10 to 20 percentage points to each one of these countries' public debt GDP ratios. This is not a South African problem. This is a global problem. The key to understanding whether this is a crisis or a problem is related to the debt servicing costs. And if we look at the debt servicing costs, it's not such a big deal because our debt servicing costs are still quite comfortable compared to most of our peers. And I think, just moving back to that one quickly, what I'd like the viewers just to have a look at is the denominator. This is the public debt divided by the GDP. Now, the minute your GDP increases, the sum becomes smaller of that equation. But there's a double effect because the public debt, if your GDP grows, your tax revenues increase and you don't have to borrow so much money. So you've got a double positive effect if you get the GDP growing. And that is what this government of ours, under our new president, Cyril Ramaphosa, is hell-bent on doing, is growing the economy. And by Jove, I can guarantee you they're going to do it. I've got some pretty good news on that score as we go along. Of course, we are, technically, according to Stats SA, we are in a recession. Our gross I differ from them in some respects because our gross national product in the first quarter grew in real terms at 3.6%. So we had one disastrous quarter, which was the second one, and in the third quarter we're going to blow the lights out, which is very good news. But the fact is that the second quarter was terrible. It's been said that if your neighbor loses his job, it's defined as a recession. If you lose your job, it's a depression. The good news is that we're on our way out. And just to illustrate the fact that I'm aware of the causalities involved with this downturn of the economy, which started before COVID. And this is, if you look at this slide, this is capital formation. Now, capital formation in our economy and GDP growth are correlated almost 95%. And what you'll see here is that big dip in the state-owned enterprises capital formation. And the reason for that is our previous president and the people that he appointed to head SARS, Eskom, Petro SA, you name it, the Nel in the old days. They were stealing us rotten. The corruption, theft, and fraud that occurred there was of such a nature that there just was no money left to do the infrastructure bit, to spend money on the stuff that we need to grow the economy. Now, all three of those lines are going to start ticking up very quickly. That I can more or less guarantee you. I have to say something quickly about agriculture because this has been a pillar of strength. It doesn't matter which crop you choose. Maize, sugarcane, oranges, our yields, our productivity are just unbelievable. South African farmers are in a class of their own. Our orange exports are growing like it's going out of fashion. People overseas seem to believe that if you buy South African oranges and you eat that stuff, you won't get COVID. And a friend of mine here in Northwest, they are expanding their orange production like you can't believe. And during the lockdown, of course, he was making a killing. They were selling Lemoen Mampoer, that's now orange moonshine, at 150 Rand a liter bottle. And he made a killing. He bought a new Ford Ranger, as far as I know. So there have been some upsides as well. That same friend of mine told me that during this lockdown, he got the impression that some of the command council members are so narrow-minded that when they look through a keyhole, they use both eyes. But that's his opinion. You can judge for yourself. It was strange, though, that you can smoke marijuana, that you plant in your backyard, but you cannot smoke Stuyvesant. It was really a little bit bizarre, but at least now we are not experiencing at this point a second wave, which is brilliant stuff. We tend to be a tough lot here at the southern tip of Africa. Here's another V, it's the Agbiz IDC Confidence Index, which is great news. Above 50 means that there is positive sentiment, and in fact that represents an expansion. Below the 50 is a contraction. Here's another V, the value added by agriculture, which is magnificent. And this is quite amazing. For the first time in half a century, agricultural and food exports are this country's #1 generator of export earnings. They've overtaken vehicles and components, who were in the first place for quite a while, and way above the usual suspects, platinum, gold, iron ore, and coal. So well done to our farmers. And there you can see the growing trade surplus of our agriculture and food exports, which is really good news. And this has stood us in such good stead in South Africa during the COVID. Other good news, as far as the rest of the world is concerned, and please don't be mad at me, but I'm actually glad that the oil price is increasing. The reason for that is that this, and there's another V, clearly shows that the world economy is growing again. And now I want you to use your imagination a little bit and pretend that we have February's PMIs in here as well. You probably know what PMI stands for, Purchasing Managers Index, services and manufacturing. And if I had included February's, which I didn't do because the slide becomes too busy, you would have noticed for each one of these 6 countries a very pronounced V. I wanted to include all 6 of the world's largest economies. You'll notice France is not on this slide because Brazil overtook them last year, and I believe Brazil will overtake the UK this year. So what's that space? The emerging market economies, of which South Africa is a very prominent member. We are the future, make no mistake about that. Here you see arguably the prettiest V, or the most pronounced one. China took its knock 2 months earlier, of course, and it's right up significantly above the neutral level, and this is the world's second largest economy. Never in the history of the IMF has there been such a large spread between 1 year's growth forecast and the next year. And what you see on this slide, of course, if you were to include 2019's actual GDP growth, which was positive for all 7 of these countries, you would see another 7 Vs. You can add that to your little list. And I think it's time that people appreciate the fact that, yes, we can talk about whether the economy will contract by 5 or 6 or 7 or 8%, but let's rather focus on the bars above the line, because 2021 is less than a quarter away. And that's what we need to focus on. There will be growth next year, and from a low base, that growth promises to be quite substantial. This slide really illustrates, to a large extent, one of the key aspects or characteristics of the COVID pandemic, and that is that there was a shift in people's behavior Uber, whom we all are aware of, their revenue from rides dipped by 75%, and their revenue from Uber Eats more than doubled. And this trend is likely to continue, except that the revenue from rides will slowly but surely recover to its previous level. But Eats will probably have received a structural boost, and I think that's very important to appreciate. As the pandemic passes, new sectors, subsectors of the economy have in fact been created as a result of the digital revolution. The fourth industrial revolution has now been thrust upon us. You don't have choices anymore. You've got to get to grips with this. But you are still going to eat, you're still going to plant maize, you're still going to have a nice slice of biltong with your ice-cold beverage after your exercise, preferably. So a whole new world has opened, in fact, in terms of products and services. And you can clearly see that also in the revenues of global tech companies. Apple's total market capitalization today is larger than the FTSE 100 companies listed on the London Stock Exchange. It is almost unbelievable. What's important to appreciate is that this is not a dot-com bubble scenario, because each one of these companies has a pervasive value chain. And within that value chain, there are hundreds of companies whose price-earnings ratios are not remotely as high as these guys. I mean, I can't afford to buy these shares for various reasons, but one of the reasons is they're too damn expensive. But they are really solid companies who promise, they've got a promise for fund managers in future. And at the Optimum Financial Services Group, where I act as economic advisor, we are certainly having a look at those value chains. In South Africa, the V-shaped recovery is also evident. I thought I'd just slip in this one. Short-term insurance premiums received. This is quite pertinent to the microfinance sector because it's nice to provide loans to people if they're backed up by some assets. And this trend, this is just before COVID, this trend would not have occurred unless people are buying assets. So there has been in the private sector, there has been positive capital formation, which is productive assets in economics, since Ramaphosa became president. And just to clearly demonstrate my objectivity, I'm aware of the fact that real household disposable income will decline this year, probably by not much more than 4 or 5%. It will increase next year by probably the same margin. So it's not the end of the world. It was a fast and furious and horrible downturn of the economy. But in nominal terms, it will probably be quite stable this year and then growing again next year. One of the reasons why we are experiencing this fairly dramatic and swift recovery is because of the fact that almost 70% of this country's GDP is generated by the services sectors, which is obviously where the MFSA and their members also are classified. Here's another V. The ratio of this country's foreign income receipts to income payments has increased on a structural basis. Remember that these slides are one-dimensional. I try to be objective, as you've noticed, but it does remind me of the definition of a statistician, who will tell you that if your feet are in the oven and your head is in the freezer, on average, you are quite comfortable. But please don't try that. Right, now we're solidly into V-shaped territory. Mineral sales at current prices hits a new all-time record in August this year. And mineral sales for the first 8 months of this year, compared to the first 8 months of previous years until 2011, have also reached a new all-time record high. Now, this is in a pandemic year. So our primary sectors, agriculture and mining, have come to the party big time, and it has also helped us to preserve a hell of a lot of jobs. I noticed this morning in engineering news that Afrimat, one of the largest construction sector listed companies, they've increased their profit in the 6 months to August. Now remember, the 6 months to August, this interim period has probably been the worst for most companies around the globe. And they managed to increase their profit, and they did not retrench one single person. So it can be done. And most of the people that lost their jobs in the second quarter will have those jobs back, I'd like to predict, by the second quarter of next year. There's another V, retail trade sales. There's another V, just the general dealers, isolating them in August this year. Total retail trade sales for general dealers, those are the big guys, almost 42 billion. In June last year, it was under 40 billion. So quite frankly, the cynics that are talking about years and years before we recover, quite frankly, do not know what they're talking about. There's another V, wholesale trade sales. This is being driven by those sectors of the economy that are involved in capital formation and highly productive economic activity, including construction, including agriculture, and construction materials. Once again, really good news. Another V, the JSE. There's a cynical story about how do you make a small fortune on the stock exchange. You start with a big one. I think that's quite cynical. If you'd bought more or less any share on 20 March, you would be smiling all the way to the bank right now. And even the real estate investment trusts are paying dividends. So one must be selective. And when it comes to, of course, investments, you need expert advice. Just a bit of trivia in terms of whether we as South Africans can maybe start having a relook at the way we spend our money. This is the composition of the consumer price index. If you add all of these percentages together, you get to 100%. This is what we spend our money on. Housing and utilities, that's electricity, water on top, food second. I don't think there are any surprises. So we go down the list. Alcohol, my students tell me that alcohol should be part of food. They tell me beer is a staple food. I don't agree with them necessarily. And then we go down to education. Now just compare alcohol to education and health. We spend more on alcohol than on education and health combined. So certainly we need to do something about this. There's a saying that says when the going gets tough, the tough go drinking, and maybe that holds for too many people. Some quick trivia questions, just to remind us of some of our, something that we can be, many things that we can be so proud of. First heart transplant, Cape Town. How many countries are classified as mega diverse? 17 of them. South Africa is in the top 10. Where's the only Merck plant to match Stuttgart's standards? East London. Which country achieved the highest score for scientific capability in the awarding of the SKA project? We were up against, in the final round, New Zealand and Australia. We blew them out of the water. Came first. The migration of South Africans to Australia, of course, has had a beneficial effect on the world labour market because it has increased the average IQ of both countries, I've been told. What was the nationality of the engineer that designed the world's most effective method of breakwater protection? That was Mr. Kruger from East London. Where's the world's largest wine cellar? That's Polly ons gaan Parel toe. In the Western Cape, we have the most official languages in the world. And maybe on that score, just to be a little bit philosophical, try to remember that where you have different value systems, many different value systems, some of whom are merging, you will always have scope for conflict. And where you have poverty, you will have crime. Make no mistake about that. So if we can blend the best characteristics of our different cultures together, then we're home and dry, because one of the world's most famous modern philosophers, Michael Novak, argues with data to backing up that the true source of the wealth of nations does not lie in agricultural land, iron ore, gold, platinum. It lies in human creativity. And if you have the most official languages, you have the most cultures, you are such a diverse country. Ultimately, if your educational system can improve, you are going to show the world a couple of tricks. And with our new president, I can almost guarantee you that we will be creating jobs at a rapid rate from 2021 onwards. And of course, which country's rugby team has the best World Cup record? That's South Africa. Those of you that have noticed, I've got the 95 World Cup tie on, and pretty proud of that as well. I'm not going to talk to this slide, just to mention that there are 15 key global competitiveness indicators for which South Africa is ranked in the top quintile in the world. And they are spread through all the pillars of competitiveness. The bottom line here is that we have everything it takes to grow this economy and to create a lot of jobs. Venezuela did not become a failed state because of a lack of resources or because of a lack of people. They became a failed state because of the wrong policy choices, and the same thing holds for Zimbabwe. We are now following a road where we have the right policy choices. We did not have that during the Zuma years, and we are now experiencing a paradigm shift, which means effectively that you are moving 180 degrees in the opposite direction, and we should be very grateful for that, quite frankly. Growth drivers and route to 2021, import replacement, one of the key tenets of President Ramaphosa's new recovery and reconstruction plan is local government, local procurement, Well, fixing local government is one of them as well. but local procurement, buying South Africa. And there is so much potential. We import more than 160 billion rands worth of manufactured stuff just in 6 groups, mostly from Southeast Asia, mostly from China, that we also export. I mean, this is a paradox. Why the hell would you want to import a saucer from China if you have dozens of saucer manufacturing firms in South Africa that also export the stuff? And this is what Mr. Ramaphosa, Mr. Mboweni, Mr. Patel are going to focus on. And I think there's lots of scope, especially if we think of the broader market that we have, SADC. 340 million people, that's more than the United States. So yes, they have lower per capita income, but we're moving in the right direction there as far as that's concerned. I'm just about nearing the end. Our cumulative trade balance at close to 200 billion rand is a new all-time record. So we have fundamental balance of payment stability. We have the lowest interest rate in 50 years. I'm not 100% sure how that's going to impact on you, but the fact of the matter is that this will certainly assist growth and employment creation, and inflation remains very low. So we can look forward to an extended period of low interest rates without a shadow of doubt. I have it on good authority from some fund managers that we will not have interest rate increases in 2021. I may be wrong on that one, but I'm placing my bets there. Now, the fact of the matter is that lending rates and durable and even semi-durable consumption are inversely correlated. So it stands to reason that if we can maintain these lower interest rates, we can grow this economy. Here you see the result of an econometric study which we did at UJ. Prof. Ilse Botha and myself, no relationship. She was van Rensburg when she was my best student 28 years ago. Maar sy het reg getrou soos ons Afrikaans sê. She married Lawrence Botha, he works for Woolies, by the way. And we asked the model to tell us what would South Africa's GDP have been today if the real prime rate, prime minus CPI, had stayed at 3%, where it was for the entire duration of Jill Marcus's tenure as Governor of the Reserve Bank, and not gone to 5.3% on average. And there you can see the answer. We would have had a GDP 560 billion rand larger. This is a beautiful slide. If you ever doubted whether there was a Ramaphosa effect, there you can clearly see it in the foreign direct investment inflows, quarterly averages. You can also see the effect of the financial crisis and the state capture issues. I'm not going to talk to the slide in detail. I just want to tell you that what I do have here, and I'm going to speak to Henny and find out if you can maybe email this to the viewers, those that have registered. These, what you see here is 14 important reasons why Moody's was wrong to downgrade us and why we will grow this economy from 2021 onwards. I just want to maybe point one of them out, the last one, 62 infrastructure projects, including a 190,000 unit residential construction valued at 220 billion rand, which is on the verge of kicking off. It's not promises anymore. It's bricks and mortar time, and there's urgency with President Ramaphosa's new plan. My second last slide, the MFSA BER Purchasing Managers Index has reached its highest level in 14 years. Now, this will not happen unless manufacturers are bullish about the future. And my last slide, once again, 2020, 2021 growth forecast for the next 2 years, huge spread. There's virtually no economist in this country that does not expect growth of above 2%, some of them talking about above 5% next year. So my ultimate message is, prepare for growth. Don't get bogged down in April. Don't get bogged down in the second quarter. Things are improving at a rapid rate. Stay healthy, listen to the protocols, and best of luck. Thank you.